All right. So before we dive in and sort of introduce ourselves a little bit more, I just want to thank Fredrickson Learning for hosting this event and inviting us to come and speak to this audience today. I'm so excited to be here. But just a quick note about kind of who we are and how this started. We're Team Rise, and we're going to speak to you all today about our experience with something called the xAPI cohort, which we'll go into a lot more details in just a moment. But for now, let me introduce your team of speakers presenting here to you today. So I am Renee Johnson. As Luke said, thank you, Luke, for that introduction. I am a PhD student in instructional design and educational technology. Currently, I'm working on research in developing drone pilot training, which is kind of a novel area of developing some online coursework. And it's been a lot of fun. I've been doing it for about the last year now. And then I also have my own business where I develop courses and instructions for just a variety of different people. So now I'm going to turn it over to Leah to introduce herself.
Thank you, Renee. So thank you again to Luke for that introduction. My name is Leah Cronick, and as Luke mentioned, I am a learning designer for travelers, and I see a couple of my travelers peeps here on the call, so thank you for joining. Prior to working as a learning designer at Travelers, I taught English as a second language to international students in a higher ed setting for about 10 years. So I have a background in, adult learning and language instruction. And one other thing I'll just mention, because we're going to be talking about xAPI, is that before I joined the Team Rise cohort, I was not super familiar with xAPI. And I think that Renee and Michelle will back me up when I say that we are not experts in xAPI by any means. We sort of we joined the team and learned a lot as the process went on, which we'll get into more later. But just want to start out with kind of a caveat that although I have learned a lot and I feel much more confident about my understanding of xAPI now than I did about a year ago, I very much am not an expert. And with that, I will pass it off to Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle McCrory. I am currently a multimedia developer slash course designer for UL Solutions. That is a company that is focused on safety, and I'm really enjoying it. I became involved with the Learning Guild. They have a cohort, and I knew nothing about xAPI. So you don't have to be an experienced person, just like Leah said, to get something out of a cohort like this, because we're learning from all these people that are all different levels of experience, and they all have something to bring to the table. So I really enjoyed my time with that. I highly recommend that you just give it a go if you have time to do something like that. And back to Renee.
Yeah, totally agree. And to just sort of echo what Leah said, I am not an API expert by any means. In fact, we hope that not everyone that's watching this now or even in the replay, it's not necessarily necessary that you even know what xAPI is. So, for just a moment, let's drill into what we're going to be talking about, how we met each other, and created this group and some of the information that we're going to talk to you today. So, the xAPI cohort is a community. It's hosted by the Learning Guild, which I don't know if you want to mention in the chat if you're a member of Learning Guild or not. And if you are, you've probably maybe heard of the xAPI cohort. So, in the spring session, they run two of these cohorts during the year. And in the spring session, we all joined this team within the cohort called Rise, whose premise all circled around using Articulate Rise and how we can integrate xAPI into Articulate Rise. And again, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into what xAPI is, what we did with our project in the spring and why this might be relevant to you in your role today. Leah or Michelle, anything that you want to add to maybe just a little bit about the xAPI cohort, how we got together?
I would just echo what you said, Renee, that I mean, I think the xAPI cohort is a great opportunity to sort of learn more about what xAPI is, and really, if you want to kind of be on the forefront of cool new things that are happening with xAPI. I was really impressed by not just sort of this is what xAPI is and this is the existing technology, but the way that the different teams or groups within the cohort were pushing the existing boundaries. So if you want to learn about xAPI, that's a great opportunity. And if you already know about it and want to maybe push to do stuff with it that you're not currently able to do, which is what we're going to get into, it's a great opportunity. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a cohort going on right now. It's probably most of the way through, but you can join anytime. Is there anyone that is watching that has been part of an xAPI cohort? I might ask that in the chat if anyone has ever been a participant or ever done anything like that there.
We have a
So
couple.
looks like,
Yep.
yeah, looks like we have a couple people raising hands there. Cool. Very cool. Awesome. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper about what xAPI is. And Leah, if you want to dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we said, you very much do not need to know really anything about xAPI for this call to hopefully be useful and informative for you. So, kind of operating on the assumption that folks on the call may or may not know what xAPI is or be familiar with it, we thought that it would be important to kind of start out with just a little primer. So xAPI, I actually didn't know this before I joined the cohort, that it stands for Experience API. And what it is it's a way to track learning experiences at the most basic level. So whatever your course or your video or your demo or your thing that you're wanting your learners to do, xAPI allows you to track what learners are doing with whatever the learning content is that you've created. It enables instructional designers to track performance across different platforms, which is really important. So regardless of what LRS or LMS you're using, well, I shouldn't say regardless, but within limitations, using a variety of different types of content and a variety of different sort of tracking mechanisms, xAPI allows you to sort of filter data and get reports about who's doing what and how they're performing on whatever the thing is that you're having them do. It's designed to work with modern technologies, including mobile devices and virtual reality. It also can do really cool stuff with like physical stuff, so like Internet of Things kind of implements. So it's really it has a wide sort of breadth of possibilities, I guess I would say. And we're going to be focusing specifically on how xAPI and RISE do or don't work together. But xAPI can be used for pretty much anything you can think of. So video content, storyline courses, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll just walk you through our experience, and this is how we met each other. None of us in this presentation today knew each other before the cohort. We all met in the cohort just by joining Team Rise. And if you haven't participated in the cohort before, I'll give you just a very brief introduction of what that looks like. And it's free, by the way, which is amazing. It's this 12-week opportunity, completely free. But it's all driven by the members and people in how they decide to join and what they decide to create. So what you do is you jump into this cohort and you find some teams or groups that have some area of interest that you might share, And for us, that was Articulate Rise. And so that's how we became Team Rise. And I'll just give a brief introduction into the scope of our team and group and kind of what we did. And then I'll let Leah kind of continue on there. So in total, we had 57 members. Now, when you're working in an interdisciplinary group like this, you're going to be lucky to have even half of the people really participating. And that's fine because really xAPI cohort encourages lurkers to just kind of be an onlooker and not necessarily have to participate. If you just want to watch, you can do that. And I haven't been able to participate in the fall cohort right now, but I have been watching and just observing from a distance. So that's been kind of fun. So our group really had about 17 active members, and this is from not even just in the United States. We had an international group, people from all over. And some of those were instructional designers. Some of them were developers, software developers or coders, I guess. That's kind of what I like to refer to them as. And then we had some people that were really great at project management and just helping us work together as this multidisciplinary team from all over the place just to try to figure out how things worked. And then I guess Leah, maybe you or Michelle want to continue on any of the other factors in just our team and how we worked.
Yeah. In fact, I guess you could say I was kind of the scribe because I set up a Google folder and we all shared documents from that. I took notes on every meeting. I was kind of a little bit of a background person, but you kind of have to find your role and what you can bring to the team, and that's pretty much what I did. I wasn't an xAPI expert, but I could take notes, and I did try to make it to all the meetings, and that was very helpful in as far as organizing, what we learned from week to week. When you sleep a few days, you forget, and so it's good to have something to go back on.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point in a group like this where taking on a role like that helps you really participate and dive in without having to feel like you have imposter syndrome or don't know what you're doing, but still want to be involved and help. And every group in an event like this or an organization like this needs that kind of support to help it just develop and keep going. Leah, anything you want to add to
Yeah,
the
I mean,
dynamics?
yeah, I would just reiterate what both of you have already said that, one of the best things I think about the xAPI cohort program is that you really get to decide what level of interaction and participation you want or need. And as Renee said, you can just be a lurker and just sort of poke around and see what other folks are doing. All the way up to, if you want to start your own group and if you have an idea in mind of something that you want to explore, you can do that. So it's really flexible in terms of how you choose to participate. And I agree also with what Michelle said about, finding your place within the group, right? So however you want to participate, however want to sort of show up, there's a wide variety of opportunities. So I just really cannot say enough how much it is a valuable learning experience, especially for folks who are maybe not as familiar with xAPI.
Yeah. And what we're going to share with you as, we kind of go through this in our experience, what we are hoping to emulate for you or show for you is not just taking you through what we did, but we're hoping that with looking at our example, this could serve as a model for you within your organization, or if you wanted to work more externally as a community. And I know that many of you are part of, the Fredrickson learning community here. You could come together and work in a small group, even if you wanted to do something like this outside of the cohort. Of course, we, are high proponents of the cohort, but you could certainly do this within your organization. So what we're hoping to shed light on here is some model that you could use and kind of form your own small group within or externally from your organization. So just a brief overview of what our project looked like. And keep in mind with the cohort, this is one of many teams and projects that are happening all at the same time concurrently, and a wide variety of focuses that you could find. I mean, there were groups that were working on kind of like Leah talked about, Internet of Things, like really, really detailed, crazy kind of stuff that I couldn't even fathom how this relates. And so, we just found our niche and our group and our people among our interests and developed things from there. So once we joined the group, we had to figure out what it was that we wanted to focus on. And there were some people that I think started this group that had been part of many other cohorts before. And they had a little bit of an agenda already in what they wanted to do. And so once I came across that, I said, hey, look, I use Articulate Rise. And I was very much a newbie, had never experienced xAPI whatsoever, but I know that it's something that I wanted to get into. So I joined this team, and what we decided to focus on for this cohort, which was back in the spring, was interactive e-learning modules and figuring out what kind of learner data from xAPI data could be extracted from RISE courses. And then we also wanted to focus on specific types of interactions. So we spent probably 2-3 weeks just figuring out what types of interactions do we want to put in this course, just so we can go from a baseline point to see what kind of data we can generate with xAPI statements. And then from there were a few members of the group that are really advanced in using xAPI, wanted to take this to a whole nother level, which we'll get into a little bit later. But with that, they wanted to create essentially a wrapper that can be integrated when you publish a course that can serve as this additional tool that helps pull out more data than what you can get natively within a RISE course. And so what we're also hoping to do within this session today is we're going to give you an opportunity to look at some of what that data would look like live. And you can follow along, and we're going to give you all the steps to how you can test this out in your own organization or a community group, or just a group of people that want to learn. I mean, feel free to use this platform here today to connect in the chat and say, hey, who wants to join me? I have a project on this. Who wants to work with me? And we can play around with this and try it out ourselves. So that's one of the things that we're going to try to put together for you today, sort of as a live demo, and have you really participate. So the next step in working on our project was we had to figure out a way, because we all work in, we're all from all these different places, and we don't have any common platforms that we would necessarily use. So one of our obstacles, and we'll get into this a little bit later too in a little bit more detail, is we had to figure out how can we work together and figure out tools that we don't have to pay for, that we can use just to figure out how to work together. And so Watershed ended up being one of those additional tools that we use. So continuing on here, I want to stress that this is very much optional, just part of the experience here today. We do have a link here, and I think Michelle or someone is maybe going to put the link in the chat as well for you if you want to test out our course. So this is a mobile course, so you can scan the QR code with your phone and stay, if you're sitting at a computer, you can stay there, or if you want to open another tab, you can do this concurrently while you're watching the presentation here. One thing I do want to iterate is it's fine if it doesn't work for you. Don't worry. Like, we're going to show you a lot of other things, but we just thought that it would be fun for everyone here to be able to test this out and try it out for themselves. Something to note is this course there's nothing special about the course. It's just a demo kind of dummy course. But what we wanted to do was figure out as many interactive blocks as we could think of that we wanted to see first natively what learner data is generated when someone connects to one of these interactive elements in a RISE course. And if anyone who is watching this uses RISE, you know what some of those are. We asked that question in the beginning. I think we may even want to ask that again. I think the question was like, what kind of interactive RISE course elements would you like to see, and what kind of data would you like to see extracted from that? Michelle and Leah, anything you want to add to that while we give everyone a chance to, scan and connect and link to our course before we dive a little bit deeper into the project?
Yeah, wrong answers are also good data, so you can get some of the questions wrong on purpose.
Yes.
And that'll give us even a wider variety of data.
Yeah, and you don't even have to finish the whole course. Just know that in a moment we are going to bring up that live data, and you will be logging in with, you can put in any email or a junk email, but those will be on screen. So if for some reason you don't want your email to appear there, you might want to skip this part. All right, so let's continue on, and we're going to dive into the goals and objectives. And I think Leah's going to take you a little deeper into that.
Yeah, so we basically had 3 sort of overlapping / interconnected goals for our project. And, I think I sort of alluded to this earlier, but one of the sort of challenges of working with RISE and xAPI is that what it can do kind of natively, as Renee suggested, is fairly limited. And for those of you who are familiar with RISE and xAPI, you probably know this already. That's part of why we're asking the question about sort of what do you wish it could do. So the first thing and the biggest thing would be to enhance what xAPI and RISE, when used together, can do as far as getting data, getting reporting on things that are not currently possible with that integration. The second thing, as Renee mentioned, is the development of this JavaScript wrapper plugin. As far as I know, and I haven't actually checked in lately, but I believe that is still in process. But the idea is that we're wanting to create this plugin that will sort of allow for greater, newer, different possible options when you are integrating xAPI and RISE together. And then the third one, and this is sort of future state, is once we have the wrapper, once it sort of exists and we have that proof of concept and we're able to show that it works and it does what we want it to do, and also show that folks want this capability, right? They want to be able to collect this kind of data, that we would eventually present that to Articulate with an eye on hopefully getting them to possibly integrate some of these concepts. So probably not using the JavaScript wrapper specifically. I'm sure that they would want to sort of do things their own way. But the idea is that eventually we would love to be able to actually sort of push forward what is possible with RISE and xAPI.
Yeah, and I see that Andrea in the chat said she'd like to know if a user finished a video. Wouldn't we all?
Wouldn't we all? Yeah, a big one for me is, if they do a quiz or a knowledge check and they pass it, you don't know whether they passed it again, or like you only get one pass, right? So right. There's a lot of, we'll get into the wish list in a minute, but there are a lot of things that I think we all could kind of agree that we wish we could do with RISE and xAPI. So that's really our biggest thing, is just like, what else is there that we could be doing that we're not currently able to do, basically.
Yeah, and I think I would encourage you to, within your organization or community, if you want to dive in deeper to learning about xAPI, is ask yourselves those questions. What information what details are the ones that we want to see? What data do we want to extract? What information do we want to dive deeper into than what we could see before?
Yep, exactly. So just to give you a little bit of background about sort of how we approached the process and our methodology, and I will say too that this very much evolved kind of as the cohort went on. We very much kind of figured out what kind of cadence and what kind of, what were we going to do during the meetings and how are we going to include the folks that are in different time zones, as Michelle mentioned in the chat. So this is very much like, it looks as if we set out and said, this is what we're going to do. But in reality, it really was sort of an evolution over time, and we just figured it out as we went along. So we had weekly team meetings on Zoom. Most people in that sort of 17 active members were able to join most of those meetings, but obviously not everyone joined every meeting. We also had separate task meetings as needed. So within our RISE team, within the sort of active members of that team, we would then have even smaller groups of people who would get together to work on more specific elements of the project. We used Google Drive for collaboration and project management, which proved to be a challenge in itself because a lot of us work in corporate environments where we have firewalls, like me, for instance.
Yeah.
We had a Slack channel that was provided to us by the Learning Guild, and we used that for communication. And we also did a lot of stuff kind of asynchronously. So we tried as much as possible to use our meetings as sort of touch points and, stand-ups, if you will, sort of what progress have you made? What roadblocks are you encountering? What are you going to do between now and our next meeting? And then send folks off to do whatever they needed to do in the meantime. And I'm going to pass it back to Renee, and she's going to talk a little bit more about some of the different technology we used in order to make all of that possible.
Yes, thanks, Leah. And I'll add to that as well. I mean, part of figuring out what tools that we needed to use was part of the challenge because we had to figure out not just, what did we all have access to, but there were a few tools that we had available and we could access, but then we found out that our group was too large to manage a free version, or we ran into some various obstacles, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that a little bit later. But it's important to understand, and our hope here in presenting this today is to help you get a sort of the bird's eye view of what integrations and elements need to interconnect in this whole structure of the xAPI technology. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's difficult for organizations to implement xAPI technology because in the past, we would create a course, we'd put it in an LMS, we would collect the data, and that's pretty much it. You didn't need a lot of interconnected points. And to add to the difficulty in working with a lot of people in various organizations, we had to figure out what kind of technologies we could all use together. So RISE, that was easy, but even some of the people in our group wanted to learn RISE, but didn't even have a subscription to Articulate. So, some of them were just watching from that perspective. I think one of the biggest issues that we had was figuring out where are we going to put this course? Because normally within your organization, you just upload it to your LMS. That's where everyone accesses it. But in an external environment like what we had, that was part of the problem. So we tried out a few things, and then we ended up choosing AWS, which we'll go into just a tiny bit more detail a little bit later. But that ended up being just the platform, the server or host where we had to put the training. But then that presented its own problems because no one had to then log in. And so how could we collect data on specific users if they're not logging in? And luckily, we had a very experienced user on our team that created this ability for us to be able to do that. And so we'll get into that a little bit more later. The xAPI wrapper was part of what we really wanted to develop, and that's still in development, we hope. And then finally, in order to access this data, you have to have something called a learning record store. And while me personally, I'd heard about that before, I had never in any of the organizations that I've worked with, we either had our own custom created when I worked for a Fortune 200 company, or we were limited in other organizations I've worked with just what you can get natively within an LMS. So that was kind of where we landed on choosing the technologies that we used. And then the next thing that we needed to do was, from our wish list of all those things that we thought that we wanted to see, we made a list of all the different types of interactive elements. And I think I saw someone in the chat earlier said something about these branching scenarios and what can we do with those. That was, we had a lot of discussions around those too. I think that seems to be a really popular interactive block that you use in Rise. So if you went through and did the course that we shared the link to here, you probably saw some of these. But if you didn't, these are some of the elements that we specifically wanted to include. So we wanted to have those maybe branching scenarios to see what that would look like. We tried out some of the accordion blocks. Like, we want to know, if you're familiar with using Rise, you know that some of these things you can lock and you can force people to interact with them. So that way, they did it. But what if they just were rushing through it? Like, if they got through this section in 5 seconds, they probably didn't read every accordion block that they opened. And maybe they just randomly hit the check boxes because they know that's what they're supposed to do. So we wanted to dive in a little bit deeper and see what we would get when we created these elements. And the first step was seeing, what are we already getting from a Rise course, and then see where the limitations of that data, like where does it stop? Because frankly, it doesn't go much deeper than what you get just from SCORM data. Just, did they do it? Yes or no? So we wanted to figure out where those limitations were so that we could begin building that wrapper that's basically coding that helps that API, which is just, the computer to computer interface, to help dig deeper and pull out that additional data. So those were some of the elements that we wanted to include. And so again, I would maybe ask the chat or ask our audience, and if you're watching this in the replay, feel free to put this in the comments too. What kind of data do you want to see more of that you're not already getting, that xAPI could maybe help you get? So think about that sort of thing. All right, so let's move on to our next slide here. And I guess we might ask also in the chat, are you using an LMS in your organization, and which one are you using? Because that may have some bearing on what kind of information you're able to get as well. So we might want to start thinking about that. So in the chat, just tell us maybe what you're using now or some other LMSs that you've used before. Okay, so I'm seeing Cornerstone, lots of Cornerstone. And then Michelle, let me know if any questions come up that we need to answer. Feel free to just jump in and let us know. Oh, LMS 365. I've been playing around with that one. I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, Renee, Caitlin would like to know if there are any certain types of interactive blocks that bring in more interaction than others.
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I think the short answer to that is yes. And we're going to show you some of those in just a moment. So stay tuned, because in a moment, we're going to show you some of that live data for any of you that were able to get into the course today and look at it. And again, if you're watching this in the replay, don't worry about that. We're gonna bring up some static content that was preloaded that we'll be able to show you, so you'll still be able to get a really good example of seeing that kind of information. So I'm seeing some LMSs that I've never even heard of in here, which is, I love doing this. So that's awesome. Leah, anything that you want to add maybe about some of the obstacles that we faced in working with not having, a common LMS that we could use, or any other obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It was, I mean, I think in many ways it's one of those things where it is sort of both a challenge, but also an affordance in some ways, because having that issue of lots of different folks from lots of different organizations, all different sort of access to different technologies, different LRSs and LMSs, it's sort of forced us to figure out a solution that was going to work for everyone. And, ultimately, I think what we landed on did end up working well. And, it took us a little while to get there, as you can sort of intimate from this slide that, the first couple things we tried didn't end up working out, and we had to sort of come up with a plan B and then a plan C, and that was okay, right? The whole thing was a learning experience, and what we ended up with, I think, was ultimately really successful. So I would say that it was challenging, but kind of in a good way, I would say.
Totally agree. I think anytime you come across those kind of obstacles, especially in an environment like this where we're learning before we launch it for real. And so I would encourage you to test out these kinds of resources and put your resources that you have available to you to the test, right? See what they're capable of and go out and explore. It seems like every day new things are coming out, right? Especially with AI integrations and technologies. And so maybe your old standby go to that you've always used isn't working for you anymore. Maybe you need to go explore some other resources. So let's move on to some of this data that we've been talking about. And I think Leah's going to drill down a little bit more about the data that we were able to pull. And then in just a moment, I'm going to pull up some of our live data. Hopefully it'll cooperate with us and we'll get to do that.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. Yeah.
Right.
So as Renee mentioned, we have kind of some static data or some data that we previously collected from this sample course, the same course that we sent you a link to. And we will get into the live data in a little bit, but we wanted to show you just an example of what the data looks like, kind of that's already set, essentially. So this is an example of what the data would look like when you pull it from Watershed. And for those of you that are familiar with Watershed, this probably looks familiar to you. If you are not familiar with Watershed, that's totally fine. And as Renee mentioned, what Watershed is a learning record store, or LRS. And basically it's just a way to sort of collect and display the data that you're collecting via xAPI. So it shows you at an organizational level what folks are doing. You can also filter it by, different groups of learners, or if you have classes or that kind of thing. You see some sort of average numbers so that you can get kind of a big picture idea of what's going on. And then on the right side of the screen, you also see this heat map. And that gives you more specific data about individual interactions. So who did the interaction, who completed the interaction, and how many activities were completed, essentially. So like we have said, it is fairly limited for what is currently possible. As we've all been, spouting in the chat, there's a lot of things that we would like to be able to see and collect here that are not currently able to be seen and collected here. But this is essentially what it would look like with what is already currently possible according to the integration of RISE and xAPI. And then if we want to,
if I could just interrupt for 1 second, I might ask in the chat of those of you that are watching or in the replay in the comments, let us know if you have experience in using an LRS and which ones are you using.
Perfect. And you may or may not be using an LRS. From my experience, at least, if you have a really robust LMS, you sort of don't necessarily need an LRS, basically. We needed one because we were using an LMS that we needed something that was going to work for everyone. And so we needed one for that purpose. But we also actually use one at Travelers. So it's not totally out of the realm of possibility that you would be using both. This, and I know this screenshot is really small, so don't worry about like actually being able to read it necessarily, but this is, as you can see at the title at the top of the document, it says dreaming of a world of xAPI from Rise and a little smiley face. So we got together and literally created a wish list of exactly the same kinds of things that you all are putting in the chat. And honestly, I'm seeing a lot of overlap between what's on our list and what's on your list. So we got together and we talked about, I really wish that Rise could show me this. I really wish that I could access, I want to know if the user actually watched the video, right? I want to know if they skipped this section. I want to know how long it took them to complete this individual, interaction or what have you. So we literally made a list of all of the things that we wished we could do. And using xAPI, we were able to come up with potential possible statements that would be reported using xAPI. So for example, if you wanted to know in an audio block, if you wanted to know if the user scrolled or scrubbed through the content rather than playing it all the way through from beginning to end, we would want to come up with what are the verbs that xAPI would use in order to report on that data. So listened, played, fast forwarded, possibly those kinds of things. And same thing for all of these other wish list items. We divided them by like the type of content that the learner was interacting with. So audio, images, quizzes, videos, other, etc. And we basically wanted to sort of, blue sky, right? So like what if we could do anything with Rise and xAPI, what would we want to be able to do? And this is the list that we came up with. And I believe that Michelle just put a link in the chat to the list
Yeah,
that
I
we
saw that
generated
someone
as well.
asked if you would share it. And so
Yeah.
it is there. And yeah, feel free to copy this.
Yep.
And take it. If you're in an organization where you have departments and you have like a DevOps department, or you have software developers that can write this code for you, to create your wish list and take it to them. For me, I'm sort of an army of one and have been in those roles. So if I want it, I have to figure out how to do it. And that was part of my aim in participating in the cohort. Is I wanted to learn a little bit more about what are these statements. And I do not do code writing, but I'm very hopeful that with AI technology, there'll soon be a time where I can ask something and maybe I can get it that way. Let's look a little bit more about some of that native data that we were talking about.
So as we've mentioned, what is currently possible with the integration of Rise and xAPI is quite limited, and basically this is it. So those of you who are used to using Rise and xAPI together, you know this already, but for anybody that isn't used to that, this is essentially the sum total of what is currently possible as far as statements produced by xAPI from Rise interactions. So you can see that somebody answered a knowledge check question. You can see that they progressed, which just means that they went on to whatever the next page or the next section was. You can see that they attempted something, which basically means they started it, and that they passed it or failed it if they did not pass. They experienced something, which is, I think, the one that probably drives me the most nuts because it just feels like such a useless terminology, but that's just me. That they launched something. So if they're launching something in a separate window, for example, you can see that they did that. And finally, that they completed a course. And that is it. So if you look at the previous slide compared to this slide, you can see that there's a lot of stuff that we would like to be able to do that we are not currently able to do. So that's really sort of the goal of this whole project. And thank you so much. And then this is a static example of what the actual data looks like as it's coming in. And it looks like these are all you, Renee. So you can see that Renee
share my name on there and not worry about other people having their stuff shared.
You can see that Renee correctly answered this question, which was like a matching activity. You can see the responses here. Typed an answer here. multiple choice here, et cetera, et cetera. So those are some examples of what that limited data would look like.
Yeah.
And
So now,
yeah, I think we're ready for our live data.
yeah, let's see what we got. Okay. So, bear with me 1 second as I open up our, it takes, if you have ever worked with Watershed before, as new data comes in, it takes just a moment for it to load. So we're going to let that load. And in the meantime, if you just came in, you can feel free to scan that QR code and go into our course. If you're just joining us or haven't had a chance yet, you can scan that and check it out. And what I'm going to do now is share this. Hopefully, this will show up. Just 1 second. It's always slow within the Zoom environment. So let me expand on this, and hopefully you're able to see some of this. So what we're looking at right now is the live data as it's coming in. So even if someone's in there taking the course right now, this would start to populate. Obviously, there's a little bit of a delay, but this is the kind of information that you would see. So what we're looking at on the screen right now is, and again, you have to, there's a process to this. This doesn't just, it's not, I won't say that it's super difficult, but I consider myself to be a very tech savvy kind of person. And even just getting the course where the course is to figuring out how to connect that in Watershed was a bit of a process for me. It's not the most user friendly kind of situation. But luckily, we had some people in our cohort and team that had done this before and helped walk us through. And that was just immensely helpful. So what you're looking at is some of the just raw data. Okay, so just like what we looked at before, we're seeing some people that came in, they, correctly answered a choice. Now, what you can do from here is each of these links that you have here, those are related to a specific section of the course. Now, if you're really great at analytics and maybe doing Power BI or some other kind of tool like that, and then you can even build your own reports within Watershed, you can make this a little more user-friendly, natural language instead of saying they attempted whatever this link is here. Once you identify those, then you can put it in real kind of language. And then you can start playing around with your data and analyzing things over time. And let's say that you have multiple courses that have all kinds of different elements. I mean, you can imagine how robust this kind of data gets. I mean, just overwhelmingly, I think we had a previous slide that was up there, and we had, of the people during the cohort, we had, I think, less than 50 people that accessed the course and participated in some element of the course. And I think we had just under 800 interactions. So that's 800 individual pieces, really granular data that we could go analyze. And then you could figure out how to group this information and figure out how to make a little bit more sense of it. But this is kind of what you get natively, just this raw data that comes in. So let me pause here and see if anyone has any questions about this data. I think I see a question there about Cornerstone. Anyone familiar with Cornerstone that wants to answer how you would connect those two? I am not familiar. I've used Cornerstone, but I am not sure about that one. I will say this, that I have seen Cornerstone groups in the cohort. So, and here's the other thing is you can join the cohort and you can go into the Slack channels and go browse. And I mean, talk about rabbit holes. You could get lost in there. I have been lost in there for hours, just soaking all of this information in. So that might be a resource that you could go in and go find, a current or previous group that's working on Cornerstone, and you can go find that. But before we kind of jump back out of Watershed, any other questions about the data that we collected or what you're seeing on the screen? I guess I could go up here just really quick. I'm not an expert at Watershed. I'm pretty new at this, but I will say that there are some different types of reports that you can automatically generate, that it automatically generates. So it makes sense of some of that data for you. So like you can see the leaderboard here from the most recent participants. You can see how many interactions they had. So those are just some interesting kind of things that you can see. I think we showed an example of the heat map before. So again, you can see, and that one drills down a little bit deeper. And there are custom reports that you can build, and we could have a whole hour-long session just on Watershed. But with that, yeah, it's definitely something to get into. So with that, let me take this back down and let me get back to our presentation here.
Yeah, while Renee's doing that, I just wanted to put a very tiny plug for the Learning Guild. I'm going to put a LinkedIn link in the chat for it. It's just a great group to be a part of. This is just a very tiny part of what they do. They have lots of different things that are very informative to our community. I would highly recommend you check them out. And they also, looks like they're going to be a public group. It was by invitation. I mean, you had to actually apply to, they had to accept your membership, but it looks like they're going public October 19th.
Nice. Very nice. So these were our milestones that we worked again in this 12-week cohort that we participated in. We created and published a course in Rise to AWS. We were able to extract some of that native data, like what you just looked at. And then getting that to communicate, like I said, just from our course on AWS in Watershed there was a little bit of a learning curve just with that. And so at the end of the 12 weeks, we were still working on developing these xAPI statements for this wrapper. But I think it's important to note that this is not a finite kind of project. This is a forever ongoing, live, living, breathing kind of thing, because with every course that you create, you can imagine how specific the needs are to the course. And so that really was the idea of creating this wrapper was, could we create a comprehensive wrapper for Rise that would essentially have everything that anyone would ever need? And then they wouldn't have to go in and custom create something for every course that they ever built. So that's kind of where we went, and pretty much where our project ended to where it took us to where we are now. We're still in hopes of someone from our team continuing to work on this prototype, right? This wrapper. And I think the intent for that was for that person to really reach out to articulate and either sell that as a product or open market kind of product that other people could use, potentially providing that as an open source kind of resource. But yeah, so that's kind of where we are. And then we did have a few things that we learned in working on the cohort, and I'll open it up to my co-presenters here to share just kind of some last minute words on what we learned through this process, and open it up to any final questions that you have for today's presentation.
Yeah, I've got something. You really have to have a growth mindset coming into this. There was, a few people that were kind of like what Renee said about imposter syndrome. I'm not worthy of being in this group because so many people know how so much more than I do. But that's not the way you approach something like this. It's not an I can't type of thing. It's I'm not experienced yet, and I will learn this to some extent. You have to have that mindset going into something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
Same.
And I see there's a question about creating reports on learners. Yes, you can actually. So I didn't drill down to that, but for each of those items that comes in, every single interactive element, pardon me, you can click on the learner and it'll drill down to just what that learner did. So hopefully that answers that question in Watershed. And I'm not an expert Watershed user. I've used it a handful of times.
Yeah, if you want to, you can also do you can sort it according to like a timeline. So if you wanted to capture just a certain group of learners that used a certain course during a certain, time frame or what have you, you can do it that way. There's lots of different options for the data.
Yeah, I would say that you'd be able to, someone asked if trouble comes up, maybe you have a problem question within your test and a whole lot of people get it wrong. And then you can go back and figure out, why are they choosing this answer versus that answer? I think xAPI would be very helpful for that.
Yeah, for me and my purposes, that's really the why behind having xAPI, because it's not about just knowing what they experienced while they were in the course, but we want to, for my purposes, especially for research, is I want to figure out why did they spend so little time in that? Is that element not relevant to them? Or why did they not get the answers? Why did it take them 3 times to get the answers correct? Or in the branching answer, why are certain people choosing a certain path in that branching scenario? So these are all the kinds of questions that I think we want to get to the bottom to with xAPI. So before we close things out, I just want to invite you to connect with us on LinkedIn. If there's questions that occur to you later and you want to ask any of us, feel free to send connections on LinkedIn there. These are our profiles, and I think maybe we're going to put those in the chat as well. But yeah, let us know if you have any other questions. Luke, anything you have for us?
Thank you very much today, Renee, Leah, and Michelle. This was a very informative presentation, and I've been considering joining an xAPI cohort, and I am definitely going to do it now.
Yeah, you should do it.
Yep.
Yes.
Maybe not right away, but
Tell us when we'll join with you.
Oh, sounds good. Yes, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I see that there were a few more questions in the chat that we didn't quite get to. I know we came up on 1 o'clock pretty quick, but one thing I would plan to do is, one, we did record today, so we will have this available on our YouTube channel. I also plan to gather all of the data points that people would be interested in collecting, and kind of sharing those out too, as kind of a what we wish we could collect type document.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, if questions come up or something we didn't answer, feel free to reach out to us. And once the video gets uploaded, I'll go in and check the comments as well. So thank you so much for inviting us, and for everyone who joined us today. I feel like I learned a lot in this experience, just learning and connecting with this group. So thank you so much.
Thank you as well.
Thanks, everyone.